Welcome to this week's episode of Seeking Proof, Finding Grace. I'm your host, Ron Campbell, and this week, as with every week, I want to remind you of the most important truth in the entire universe. God loves you. Now, this week, we're going to wrap up this journey to our little blue planet. And I'm probably going to make some strong statements. I've probably been making some strong statements over the last couple weeks. And I don't want this to come across as argumentative or difficult or anything like that. Because I think when you debate these kinds of issues, it's difficult to always maintain a good spirit when you're talking about this stuff. The reason that this is important is that you have a creator who loves you so much, he was willing to lay down eternity and become one of us, live a perfect sinless life and die on a cross to reconcile us back to himself. And if you've got questions about that, the first few episodes that we did, we talked about the atonement, we talked about why it was necessary, we talked about what God's purpose was. And God's purpose, I mean, I'll just cut to the chase. It's you. God's purpose is you and me and having a relationship with us. That's the purpose of everything that we see around us. You are literally so important that the creator of the universe went to all of this work to bring us to this point. And I'm jumping the gun a little bit when I say that because I'm jumping to the conclusion before we've talked about the data, which, apologies. We have had several different stages along this journey so far. We had the cosmological argument, which talked about the beginning point of the universe. How do you go from nothing to something? And how do we get to that point? And we talked about the most likely explanation is the existence of an intelligent third party. Then we talked about the fine-tuning of the universe that science has discovered in the last 50, 60, 70 years. As we look at the conditions that exist in the universe around us, it shows the absolute fingerprint of an intelligent designer. Simply put, you cannot get numbers that precise. You cannot get design. There's no other word for it. You cannot get something as well put together as our universe without the fingerprint of design when we understand what all of these different components and things, how the universe is put together at the basic fundamentals of physics and mathematics and things like that. When you look at how the universe is put together, it defies explanation other than the absolute fingerprint of intelligence. And what differs in all of these is there's not going to ever come a point in time where you say, well, you're just trying to play this God of the gaps game. And you're taking something that's science, using science in the third person, and I'm not trying to have an attitude there. Science, if you just give it enough time, will come up with an answer. And this idea of identifying science in the third person is extremely dangerous, and we've talked about that in the past. That becomes faith in an unknown God. That science, this unknown God, is somehow going to provide an explanation to things that and again, it's not that they can't be explained, is that the explanation for them clearly points to an intelligent designer. When you stop at the first point, the cosmological argument, you cannot go from nothing to something. Not if you stick to a true definition of nothing. What you find is a lot of people changing the rules and turning nothing into, it's almost nothing. Okay, almost nothing is not nothing. The basic premise of the Kalam cosmological argument, whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. And unless you want to try to fight around the question of whether or not the universe began to exist, and I'm sorry, Einstein has really locked that one in. And the discoveries since then, it's not just Einstein. We're not just living on the general theory of relativity. But when you look at the contributions from people like Hawking and Penrose and others in the decades since, what you see is absolute confirmation that the universe had a beginning point. And what we don't want to do is to try to come back to this idea, well, luck will get us around all of these things. You can't rely on luck to solve every problem. And so there is no explanation outside of an independent third party that can create the universe from nothing. There is no explanation, no good explanation for where the universe could come from that is so finely tuned for our existence, the numbers just defy explanation mathematically. You cannot simply put luck in there. And the idea of a multiverse and things like that are simply ideas to build up enough mathematical chances that you can put luck back into the equation. What we're going to see here is the third miracle in all of this. The first two, the cosmological argument and the argument of fine-tuning, or the teleological argument, those both clearly point to a creator. And what we see here from this journey, from the beginning point, whether you want to call it the Big Bang or whether you want to call it the creation moment when God created the universe, or that independent third party created the universe, what we see from that moment to where we are today, again, shows the fingerprints of design. And here's why I say that. Back when we started this journey, I said, okay, at some point along the way, we can all say, well, you could have several lucky things that came together, and that's very possible. But what if you had dozens on top of dozens on top of dozens? What if there were so many of these things as we went from the beginning point to where we are today? At what point would you have to stop and say, well, that's too many? Luck can't possibly account for that many things. What we've covered on the last few podcasts leading up to this have been 44 independent items. I know we can nitpick some of them. We can look at some of them and say, well, you're double counting that one because you kind of talked about this one before and things like that. I get it. Let's just say over 40, nearly 4 dozen items. And we could have put a lot more on the table too. And some of these are absolute deal breakers. Some of these cannot possibly be explained by luck, no matter what you do. And again, remember what you've got to do, going all the way back to the beginning, as you begin building the initial stars, which will feed into the next generation of stars, which feeds into those early galaxies, which lead to where we are today, our solar system, our planet, where we are in this enormous process. Along the way, what we've seen are, like I said, 44 examples of items that each one of them miraculously has come together to support life on this planet, and sometimes in ways that are so remarkably implausible that you just can't attribute luck to it anymore. I am not going to begin to argue that some of these could not be related to just luck. Again, we talked a couple weeks ago about the idea of all these overlapping zones, the liquid water zone, and all of these different zones, the photosynthesis zone, and all of these things, how you had to have all of these zones interlock with each other so that you could find one little place where all of these different zones came together. Okay, but a lot of those can be attributed to luck. I get that. You could technically have a planet. There's probably lots of planets that sit, and we know that. There are lots of planets that probably sit close enough to their star that they would be in that liquid water zone. But that's not enough to support life. And so as we go through this list, and I'm not going to read all of them, I will put these in the notes. I'll see if I can put them in the notes. This is going to be a lot. It may be too much for the notes to hold. But as you go through this list, I want to talk about a couple of the deal breakers. And I want to talk about the large categories as we go forward, just to remind you of where we are. So we have that first category of the initial generations of stars that led to the second generation of stars. And what you had to have, those stars acted like furnaces to create the heavier elements that would eventually be needed to produce life. And one of the things we talked about is that discovery, how that led Fred Hoyle down the path of realizing what was really the first discovery along the lines of looking at this idea of a universe that is so incredibly complex, the fine-tuning of the universe, that it's just simply impossible on its own. So we see in this first grouping the initial formings of the early stars and the building blocks of the early universe. Then we move into our galaxy, and we had the fact that our galaxy is a spiral galaxy, has just the right mass, it's just the right age, it's just the right size, has all the right building blocks and materials, it's just the right shape. It has enough materials, kind of weird to think of, that galaxies feed on other stars and other planets and other galaxies and clusters and things like that. It has just the right materials to keep feeding on, to keep our galaxy in the right formation, to keep it healthy and where it needs to be. All of these things that would lead to the long-term development of life on Earth. Then we get into our solar system, and we look at the development of our solar system and how ridiculously improbable it was that we find our solar system coming together. And again, this idea that our solar system started off in the bright shining center of the galaxy, got all the materials that it needed to support life later on, and then it moved out to a safe spot for that life to exist. That just defies explanation, and that's going to be probably the first deal breaker that we have in all of this. We also then come together and we look at the orbits of the planets, and we talked about Newton's quote, where he said, and Newton looked at this question and said, obviously we understand how gravity keeps the planets in check and in their orbits where they are today, but gravity cannot begin to explain how they got to where they are and what started their orbits where they are. You can't look to gravity to explain that. It keeps them in place now, but who started them in motion? Who set them in place? And so we saw Newton's dilemma, and we recognized the movement of Jupiter and Saturn, everything that they had to do to clear out some of the asteroid belts, to play, basically to provide a security fence for Earth and the interior planets, to stop meteorites and things like that from coming in and devastating our planet on a regular basis. We talked about all of those things, and then we talked about our moon and how remarkably improbable our moon's formation was. And again, this is something that defies explanation of luck being able to possibly be the answer. Anytime you have a situation where two Earth planets come together, just the right time, just the right angle, just the right speed, just the right size. And the amazing thing is this collision of two early planets produces exactly what we need to be friendly for life and takes away all the things that we don't. And it produces a satellite for Earth that is unlike hardly any other satellite of what we see out there in the universe. It is unique, it is rare, and again, remarkably friendly for life here on Earth. And when you look at that, that becomes our third just absolute deal breaker. But we see this enormous list of things when we look at the formation of our moon. Then we look at the sun. And we look at our sun, and again, what do we find? It's the right kind of a star with the right type of a main sequence. It's got the right mass, the right makeup, it's in the right position. It's got all of these things that we happen to need. I quoted last week talking about the type of light that our star produces being in the 10 to the 25th power in terms of all the potential light that it could produce in the electromagnetic spectrum, how incredibly rare the light that we get is. And as we looked at our sun, how remarkably improbable all of those things were. And then we looked at the location of our little blue planet here in space, and all of these different overlapping zones that we talked about a little bit earlier, and how ridiculously impossible all of these things are. And what you start to see is you look at all these zones overlapping, and while each one of them may not on its own be a deal breaker, when you think about what it takes to combine all of these together, because again, at every step along the way, if you don't have the right galaxy, if you don't have the solar system that moves miraculously from the center of the galaxy to the outer edge, if you don't have this incredibly unlikely moon formation, if you don't have the right sun, if you don't have all the right zones, if you don't have everything that comes together perfectly, and each one of these has to stack one on top of another on top of another, it's a deal breaker. We're done. Everything could work out perfectly, but if we don't have just the right amount of water, it's all over. Or if we have too much water, it's over. Or if we get locked into orbit with our sun where we no longer rotate, it's over. There are so many things that could go wrong. And every single one of them not only has to go right, but the one before it has to go right, and the one after it has to go right. And then the next one has to go right. And all the way down the line, 44 times or more, every one of them had to go just right. And last week we talked about our little blue planet and just a tiny fraction of the things that make our planet so very special. When you line all of these things up and look at these things, again, 44 different items. 44. When you line all of these things up, is the most likely explanation, well, we had to be the winners of the universal lottery. It was the only way we were going to explain universal fine-tuning. Is that sooner or later our universe got lucky. The odds were mathematically impossible, but we used the multiverse to get past that. And now, once we've got our universe, we have to go leaning on a mathematically impossible amount of luck once again to get to our little blue planet. Does luck really explain everything? And I guess that's what I'm asking you to look at this point. As you look at this, what you see is the fingerprint of design. You see a universe that has been carefully crafted, a galaxy that has been painstakingly put together, a solar system that has gathered just what it was needed, and then it was moved into just the right spot. A planet that is just primed and perfect with just the right star and just the right moon and just the right everything that was needed to allow for this amazing stage for a relationship to be offered from a creator who loves you. That is the most likely answer. Not only do we begin to see, and this is where we start to see the fingerprint of a creator, of who that creator might be. Because up until now, we saw the fingerprint of creation, but now we start to see the painstaking care and attention that went into designing a planet capable of supporting not just life, but us. And that's going to be the key. You live on a planet that was perfectly designed for you. And if you take a step back and go, well, that's just arrogant to believe that we're that important. I need you to understand this. The next time you look in the mirror, you are that important. You are loved that much. So as we look at this along the way, there are deal breakers along the way in this that just cannot be explained by luck. There's no question. But what we're looking at here is not, well, we just can't explain these things, and the only way to get around calling it luck is to stick God's name in there. That is absolutely untrue. It is wrong to look at this and say, well, there's some coincidences that all come together, and enough coincidences, that means that God did it. Not right. But at the same time, it is absolutely wrong to look at this and go, well, I don't know, there's never a point in time where luck can't explain everything. There has to be a point in time where we look at these things stacked one on top of another, that we start to see the fingerprint of design, that what we start to see is the fingerprint of intelligence, because only intelligence could move a solar system from the interior of the galaxy to a safe spot. Only intelligence could design a rotation and orbit of planets just perfectly to protect this one little planet that we're on. Only design could bring together an exact orbital location that meets all of these different zones. Only design produces a star that produces energy in a spectrum so tight, 10 to the 25th power. Only design produces a moon like the moon that we have, where we lose all of the things that we didn't need and gained all of the things that we did. Only design produces these things, because in our experience, when we look at things like that, you have the purposeful intelligence of design that produces outcomes like these. Luck doesn't do it. You never have luck explain this many things. Luck can explain something every once in a while, but after 44 times, luck can't touch that, and it's never going to. As we wrap up this portion of the journey, we are about to turn head on into this question of Charles Darwin and where did life originate and what have we been told. I think one of the things that has amazed me most when I looked back at Darwin's theory and what I was taught in high school, long before I ever read The Origin of Species, all of these things that I was taught were absolute truth that had been disproven decades, if not hundreds of years before. And, well, if not 100 years before. That is what we're going to talk about in the weeks to come. But as we wrap up this portion of the journey, we have identified our third miracle. We have the cosmological argument, we have the teleological argument or fine-tuning, and we have the journey to Earth. And all three of these items point very clearly to the most likely explanation as an independent, intelligent third party. And I hope you will continue the journey with us, because what you'll see as we go further and further into this process is not random chance. It's not luck. Even though at every step of the way we're going to be encouraged to, again, continue to write things off to luck. You are not the process of luck. You are the process of purposeful design, so that someone, the creator of the universe, could extend an offer of love and relationship to you. That is why we are here, and I hope you have enjoyed the journey thus far. Thank you for joining us this week. I hope if you like the episode, you will hit that like button on the episode and the subscribe button on the podcast. As always, you can find our podcast here on YouTube, Spotify, or iTunes. You can reach us at prooftograce.com on our website, or you can reach out to us via email at prooftograce@yahoo.com. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you're having a great summer out there. Get out and enjoy some of this amazing weather, and I hope to see you in the weeks to come. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.